crowd is enormous.
One day I'm going to see how many times I can get them to do that back to back with guests on stage. The Babylon line, I got the chance to see this on Sunday. I was telling you in the green room, I was gushing. I loved it. It's a wonderful play, incredible performances, and some of the best writing I think you can ever hear on the stage. Talk to me about when you first got the offer to do this play, when you got to read this new play.
Should I start since I've been with it a little longer? I was finishing a television series called How I Met Your Mother that I was on for a couple years. And
Pause, let them do it.
Yeah.
Okay, come back.
And I wanted to go back to the theater because that's where I felt like that was kind of my artistic home before I was on television. And a couple weeks after the show wrapped, maybe not even a month, I got an offer to do this play at New York Stage and Film up at Vassar, the Powerhouse Theater, which is a place. I was an acting apprentice there in college. Every couple years I've gone back and done a play. It's kind of an artistic home for me. So we did was it a full production? I mean, it was a fully produced production, but we put it up in like 2.5 weeks, you know. And it was the entire cast except someone else was playing Liz's role. So we did this production, ran it, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. And then there was talk of wanting to do it again. We did a reading at Lincoln Center, and then they scheduled it. And then I didn't know if I'd be available for it, but the 3 women that you love in the play harassed me in various ways to make sure I would be available for the play. And then Terry Kinney, the director, had worked with Liz, but he said to me, what would you think about Liz Reaser in the role? Liz is an old friend of mine. She was at Juilliard when I was at NYU. She was in my movie Liberal Arts. We are fond of each other, yeah?
We still are.
Yeah, we're still friends after all these years.
In 21 years.
Yeah, not that I got her the part, but I said, I'm a big fan of that idea, and then Liz can take it from there.
Well,
Take it from there.
He encouraged them to consider me.
It's making me look more powerful than I am.
And then I had to go in and like hustle and beg. And then
it's called auditioning.
It's also known as auditioning, and I did, and luckily I was, chosen. When does that ever happen? And here we are.
Talk about your character, because your character is this sort of shut-in who's sort of coming into her own eventually after being a bit repressed for a long time, and you do a wonderful job of embodying that. In the play, in your performance.
Thank you.
You come off as really yes.
What are you saying?
Nothing.
Well, my character, her name is Joan Delamond, and she has not left the house for 7 years until now. And I would assume she has some sort of an anxiety disorder or depression, or is just trapped in a life where she doesn't know how to move forward, and eventually she realizes that she wants to write and that she needs to write. And so she signs up for this writing class, and this is my teacher here. So it's just your typical, teacher-student.
Yeah. And you have these absolutely beautiful monologues that you get to do that are essentially the short stories that you've written, that you perform in the play, that are some of the most wonderful writing I've ever heard. But as I said before to you, in the green room, it also seems like a huge challenge as an actor.
It is. I mean, it's some of the most beautiful writing that I've ever gotten to say. And, Richard Greenberg is an absolute genius writer. I mean, he's even just reading it's an experience. I mean, it's like Tennessee Williams, or, he's one of the great American playwrights. But getting out there and doing it every night, it has to really be a conversation. It can't be like, here I am doing this flowery speech. So it's really, Josh and I talking to each other and hopefully, making it come to life. So thank you.
Josh, in many ways, you're narrating the play from beginning to end. So you were similarly doing what she is doing in terms of these monologues, these stories that you have to do. Coming from How I Met Your Mother and wanting to do theater, what was it like getting a Richard Greenberg play as the first thing that you could come back to? It's not like you sort of took a small part, or you dove right in.
Yeah. Well, I tend to rise to whatever occasion is offered me. So I actually do better with more on my plate in a weird way. That's, I've written and directed and starred in 2 films, and it's like impossible. But for some reason, when it seems impossible, I kind of tap into reservoirs of, ability or resilience that I didn't know I had. So I like being overwhelmed by a task because it scares me sufficiently that I work really hard. Whereas if something seems a little less daunting, I'm less inclined to stay up a little extra late, working on it or whatever, or put in the extra mile.
You need that like spite, doing something in spite of yourself, sort of feeling like.
Yeah. Like, because
tell me I can't do
I'm
this.
always fighting my natural laziness. I think
Same.
a lot of people are, and I get a lot done because I try to triumph over my procrastination and my inherent what I think is laziness. But it spurs me on to actually do things. So I wasn't. I was more excited by the challenge, although, I find this role to be incredibly exhausting because it's two roles essentially. I'm playing the narrator role, and I'm in the play. So I'm kind of I have this relationship with the audience, and I have a relationship with all the cast members or the characters. So it requires an enormous amount of focus because, especially, if I screw up in a scene with Liz, she can toss me a line or give me support out her eyeballs, whatever she can do. Whereas if I go up with the audience, they're not going to help me. They're just sitting there. So it's a little terrifying. So I really have to stay focused and. And like what Liz was saying, the language is incredibly poetic, but one thing I was working on, especially with the narration, is to keep it kind of colloquial. This is just the way this guy talks, and he's older, so the memories are tumbling forth, and he's just, he even says at the end, he said too much. He didn't even mean to say all this, so.
Well, and that's interesting that you said that the two different roles that you're playing, because there are moments in the play where you have to transition in and out of those roles very, very quickly. You go from sort of starting a story to turning around and acting out that story right in that moment. Did you find that to be difficult at first, sort of, and how you sort of changed your tempo as the character?
It kind of arose organically. I mean, I didn't say like, now this is that voice and this is that voice. It was more like a flip that would a switch that would flip. Is that right? Or a flip that would switch? A switch that would flip. But like I'll be uncomfortable in the class, and then I'll pop into narration, and I'll be comfortable. It was more like like the older man as a raconteur or narrator or storyteller who has a kind of joy in telling the story, whereas my character has more of a heavy heart because he says, like we were talking about, these are people who think they're in the middle of a tragedy, but in fact, this is just the middle chapter of their quite wonderful life. So, to play a man who knows everything turns out okay on one hand, and then a man who is absolutely certain that his life is a disaster on the other hand, it's interesting to say the least.
I loved how much of a good man your character was as well, because it's a setup for something that we would see of like an archetypal situation where they would go the way that, I don't want to give anything away for anybody in terms of what happens, but he's just in general a good guy.
Yeah, it's weird. A few people have pointed out it's a different piece entirely, but it's similar to the central tension I was dealing with in liberal arts, which is this kind of temptation that is in front of you, and like the normal path of it is like, oh, you fall to the temptation, and then everyone grows up and learns from it. Whereas this is more like just choosing something else, and then seeing the cascade of events that comes from that was actually quite wonderful.
Your character, we talked about sort of how you found your character and the details of her, or we talked about the details of her, but we didn't really talk about how you found her, because you are doing something so specific with her on stage. I've never seen you perform this way, but there is a sort of sultry sort of bellow to this character, if that makes sense. Can you talk about finding that? Am I articulating that
yes,
well?
I think a sultry bellow. I like that.
It'd be weird if you're like, I don't do that. I don't know what you're talking
That's
about.
not what I meant to be
That's just
doing.
me being me.
I have a sultry bellow?
Well, I think Terry Kinney, the brilliant director, he's so wonderful. He told me, a few months out, like, she's going to have a Southern accent, and I was like, why? I don't want it. Why are you making me do that? But then we got real specific about it. It was Richard Greenberg, the playwright, said that, the secret is that she's Southern, And so we found, I started working with a dialect coach, Kate Wilson, about a month before we started rehearsal to just sort of like get the vowels and the sound. And then the sound starts doing something to your body because it's a slower sort of, it's like taffy, the way she talks. And so then that sort of starts like changing the way you breathe and the way that everything, your body. So that was really helpful. I mean, and it just told me so much about her. So we went with like a South Carolina sound and, listened to a lot of those voices. But
it adds an element of seductress to her at times as well.
Well, that's funny. That's what Terry said, was that, Southern is just sexy. That was like his simple way of saying it. But it's more than that. It's the language too. It's like she's chewing on these words in this very sort of seductive way. It's just her way of being. And I don't know, she's obsessed with this writer, Colette. And there's a great Colette quote where she says, when she raises her eyelids, it's like she's taking off all of her clothes. And that's how I see Joan, is sort of like she's so, I don't know, it's just everything she does ends up being so intimate and sort of sensual without her even trying. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like she does that over the course of the play, though. We see her very early on as timid. I remember when I was watching it, I didn't even really pick up on the Southern accent until about halfway through the play, because it seems like she does become a bit more of a seductress. I mean, through this dream or this idea that she has of Josh's character, she suddenly becomes to embody something much more, become more of herself.
Well, it's true. She decides that he's the guy. She says that with her habit of contraction, she decided he was the whole world, or every hope.
Such a great line. Yeah.
It's such a great line, and so she's decided on him, and she thinks that she needs him to open up and to move into the world and move forward in her life, and so she's picked him, and so she does. She starts to open up and sort of become more actualized.
I want to ask you guys a really stupid question. Because when I was watching the play, the language is so dense and beautiful, and what you guys are doing as performers is so nuanced and so nuanced as well. What was your secret, sort of getting into it throughout the rehearsals, making sure that you had everything down, but that you could also still perform naturally on stage while sort of just knowing all the language?
It's funny. I find that every project has different demands, but you still have to go back to the ABC basics of acting no matter what you're doing, which is listening, experiencing things in the moment, which allow you to surprise yourself, but really just being present and listening. And I think, when you have language this dense, I actually try to undercut some of the poetry and just realize this is just the way these people talk. It's not, they don't think they're being flowery or poetic. They're trying to find the best words to describe the situation they find themselves in. And for our two characters who live so much in between the pages of books and narrative and are obsessed with literature, this is just the way, I sometimes feel like our characters are imagining themselves at the center of a great Russian novel or something, that's where they're dramatic about their lives. And that comes from this kind of intoxication with literature and language.
I'd say your character less so than her character. Your character's less dramatic.
Yeah, but he has a more...
He's found a stasis
like
almost.
his writers, I think, are like Norman Mailer and Philip Roth and John Updike and these
men of the time.
The men of the time, Saul Bellow, these kind of muscular kind of that
There's
prose
that line
stuff.
in the play where he says about Colette, right?
Like girls
too
read
female
that.
for me.
Like I don't read that. That's too female. So we have different prose styles, but we connect on this. We both love Moravia, I guess.
I love Moravia.
I think just trying to make it feel organic, that this is just the way these people talk, that there's nothing elevated about it to them, and that helps the audience enter into it in a way that doesn't feel like, why are they talking that way,
Yeah, I had a similar, but also like when I'm acting, I'm trying to make words sort of disappear I feel like, because it's, you know, on camera, it's really so often not about the language, whereas here, it's like these words, I need them, and I think a lot of what Terry, the director, was trying to tell me was like, no, you want to say every single word is so necessary, where it's the opposite in movies, where it's just you kind of like looking for an accident to happen, or a moment, or a look, or not that language in movies isn't important, but it's not like this. So it was hard. It was an interesting thing to try to do.
What was it like for the two of you to go into this play after, I mean, knowing each other for 21 years? You worked together on a film as well. Does it just make it easier because you've known each other for so long?
You want to take that, Liz?
What do you think?
Well, I mean, there's certainly a familiarity, but there's also, we'd never been in a rehearsal room in that kind of space, so it was still like learning how to work together, and we had our moments.
We had our moments, and but that might be why. Like, it's a really good point. When you know someone for 20 years or whatever, as a friend, and you know, we've been on a movie, but movies, you know, whatever. You're directing it, I'm just acting in it, but being in a rehearsal room every day with an actor is a very, very intense, intimate experience. And so it's almost like we thought we knew each other better than we did, or we knew each other in a different way.
Yeah.
And so, you know, then you have to go in and you almost have to like look at each other as strangers, and sort of, not that we could, because we couldn't, how could we? But we found that, you know, we had
You had a disagreement?
But yeah, I mean, you have a couple moments.
Yeah, we had a couple moments, but like the beauty of it is that we know it's very safe, because it's like, but I love, you know, like I know you.
Yeah.
Like we're fine. So we had some laughs.
I love when actors and filmmakers come up here and talk about having moments or disagreements on set, because I think it's this weird thing that are generally kept secret, that like nobody disagrees on set or while doing a play, and it's like, no, it's a creative endeavor. Everybody has to disagree.
It might be like an American thing too, where it's like, I don't know, in my family as well. Like no one can have an argument. It's like, oh, we're all gonna fall apart.
Right.
If there's some sort of controversy or confrontation, whereas it's very natural that like we're not gonna agree on everything.
But also the rehearsal process was incredibly fertile and exciting, and we tried everything. Like, I won't say which scene it is, and I won't even tell you, but the scene that I think was the hardest to crack and find, which we tried 100 different ways, is now, I feel, one of the most alive scenes in the play, and it's incredibly simple, the way we do it. But it's because we tried it in so many different ways and banged our head against the wall, and we're so frustrated by it.
And now, which scene?
It's the blizzard scene.
Now,
yeah.
You know,
beautiful.
and it's now just working so well, because we had no... Harry didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. Liz didn't know how to do it.
Well, then Richard came in and just rewrote it, and all of a sudden it was like the...
Richard did a little rewrite on it that helped us. But a lot of times it's, you know, for conflict-averse people, which we're conflict-averse Midwesterners, Liz and I, but like, you know, there's always, when you get past the struggle and past the hard moment, there's always like another breath and another like plateau that you've gotten to. So I'm learning still, after all these years, like how to rehearse, like really how to rehearse, or as a director, like how to let things be messy, how to say I don't know, how to just let things kind of have their own natural course, and trust that if the people trust each other, and if the material's good, and there's a shared sense of mission, that you're gonna find something. And we always, you know, we did.
I have to ask, you know, you brought up what the play is about in one way, or one of the central themes, that like they think they're living a tragedy, but they're just living one moment of their life, and they're going to grow into sort of better parts of their lives. And I have to ask, like, as actors, do you relate to that on a kind of profound level? Because I feel like the actor is consistently living a freelance life of like, okay, is this it? What's the next thing? Where do I go here? Is this like even you, when you were on How I Met Your Mother, you know, you do that show for a number of years. It's wildly successful, but I would imagine there was still a part of you at times to be like, what, is this it?
I had a friend tell me that her manager told her that all actors believe two things at any given time. Every single actor believes A, my representation isn't working hard enough for me, and B, the job I currently have will be my last.
Yes, exactly.
So there's a kind of hopelessness built into the. I sometimes think of it like, you know, people like who lived through the Great Depression, but then they become multimillionaires, but they still carry like a bread in their purse or whatever. You know, It's like once you've tasted the like poverty of unemployment, like a long stretch of unemployment, it's so searing into your psyche that there's this feeling that every job, people talk about my big break, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Every job is a big break. That's what it feels like, every job. And there's something so sweet. Liz and I like really will geek out on this idea that like when she was at Juilliard and I was at NYU and we got to know each other, and if you told us, in 2016 we'd be starring in a Richard Greenberg play at Lincoln Center, that would be like, we wouldn't believe you because it would be too cool. That was kind of, when I was in grad school, like to do a new American play at Lincoln Center was like everything.
I feel that way every day walking through.
Yeah, we're so grateful for
I
it.
can't believe this is my life right now.
You want to go back to the person that you were in college and just tell them, like, don't worry, it's going to take some time, but you are going to be in a Richard Greenberg play
I do
together.
sometimes wish I could tell that person, like, cool it with the anxiety, because you're going to find your way.
I do too, but I also think it's good to fail and to remember, like, how hard it is, because then in your moments of, when the good things are happening, it's good to remember these are good, and
Still got
you're
the bread
very
in the purse.
lucky. Yeah, and you got your bread in your purse, and you're ready to go.
Let's open it up to the audience for questions. Who has questions out here?
Hey guys, I'm excited to see this, and Rebecca, I loved you in so many TV shows, and so I wondered, how did your process differ, like practicing for a play versus like TV or an episode of a TV show?
For Elizabeth?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Oh, hi. It's just so completely different. For film and television, you don't really rehearse. You kind of rehearse in your trailer by yourself or in your apartment, and hope for the best, and then the editor and the director, and you have sort of nothing to do with it at the end of the day. And then with a play, we rehearse this for weeks and on end, and you become a family, and it's this terrifying thing, wonderful, terrifying thing where, you have to then go out and do it in front of people. But it is completely different. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I think doing a play is way harder than you could ever. Any 18-hour day on a movie is so much easier than, doing a play live where, that's it. It's one shot.
Do you guys find that is the play still changing as you do it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause I saw a play a while back. I loved it, and I talked to the playwright afterwards, like a few weeks later. He's like, you got to go see it again. It's completely different. And I went and saw it again. I was like, it's not that different.
It's so minor. It's probably for us feels so different, and that's a good, exciting thing. Like last night, Michael Oberholzer forgot to close the door behind him, so I had to do a completely different entrance, and
It was hilarious.
I felt like I was falling off the face of the earth just from this tiny little change, but it was kind of exciting.
I liked it.
Next
Thank
question.
you.
Hey, Josh. So I got to see you perform in the play Disgraced.
Yeah.
And I asked Gretchen more about this too. Like, how did you get involved with that, and what was that experience like?
With Disgraced?
Yeah.
Well, that kind of was like like I said, I wanted to do some theater, so I got the offer to do Rich's play, and then very soon after I got the offer to do Disgraced, and I was like, oh great, the universe heard my wish. But I had read this book called American Dervish by Ayad Akhtar, who wrote Disgraced. I didn't know he was a playwright. I just read this beautiful novel, and I wrote him a fan letter, and he wrote me back, and then we had coffee and talked for like 3 hours and just became friends. And I didn't. He sent me Disgraced, but not saying I'd like you to be in this. He just said I wrote this play. And then when it was time to do it on Broadway, it just so happened that I was finishing the show. I had a window in my schedule, and I got the offer, and it was a terrific experience. I mean, like I said, working on a new American play, to me, that was the thing I wanted to do the most in grad school, like an American play that spoke to our current cultural moment, which certainly Disgraced does, about Islamophobia and religion and cultures clashing. It felt like such a vital piece to be involved with, and I loved it. The last 2 years, having spent time with these two plays, I feel like a very, very fortunate actor.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, guys. So I was reading up on, I think his name is Richard Hoover, and the set design team, and how they created sort of this like spectacularly depressing classroom. I was wondering, for you guys as actors, how did it feel going from a studio space to stepping on that set and how that informed your performance?
It's a huge transition. I mean, it's wonderful because you suddenly get to be with this set and the lights, and you're in the space. But, you know, vocally, it was really a huge transition for us because we were in a tiny little rehearsal room, and then suddenly you're like having to fill this huge space. But it's a gorgeous theater, and the set is really special, and it's specific, and I feel like the play really soars in that space.
I don't think of the set as depressing. I mean, it's a classroom, so if you have PTSD about classrooms, you might feel like. But there's also, it opens up in the second act in a really beautiful way, and there's these unbelievable projections on the side of the stage that kind of echo what's going on or illuminate what's going on. So it's both an incredibly realistic set, and also there's abstraction to it, which is really fascinating and beautiful. And there's, you know, like there's little details on it, like there's, you know, from Herbert Hoover up through Lyndon Johnson, there's the pictures of presidents.
I also found the reflections of your characters in the glass at times in the windows to be really striking and beautiful at moments. There were just sort of random moments where there's a dramatic scene and you could catch, like, you know, layers of the characters in the reflection.
There's a moment when you're taking your coat off, when I wander back and I see myself and see you in the glass, and I feel like that's the character kind of watching the picture of what's going on and kind of getting like a bird's eye view.
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating, yeah.
I thought you were supposed to be looking at my butt.
I know I'm looking at it quite a bit, but I have to be subtle. I actually don't, I do, but I don't want to seem pervy to the audience, but I feel like he would look at you. So that's a whole thing.
Let's see what happens tonight.
Guys, the play is at Lincoln Center right now. It's so great. Richard Greenberg's writing is wonderful, and the supporting cast is also amazing. How long is the play running till right now? How long can people see it?
January 22nd is our last show, yes. And the rest of the cast is like some of the greatest actors you'll ever see. Just incredible.
The Babylon Line, guys. It's at Lincoln Center right now. Go see it. Thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you.
Congratulations.
Talk to you
Thank
guys.
you.